What kind of weekend was that again in the crypto market? We saw it. On Friday afternoon, thanks to Sharon Paul, there was an incredibly strong pump triggered by his speech, which also completely changed the roadmap for 2025. In today's video, we'll be talking very specifically about this, including what my personal strategy is now, especially for September. September is currently a very hot topic of discussion in the crypto market, and that's why we'll be going into great detail about what my personal approach is here. In addition, we'll take a look at what exactly happened from Sunday to Monday night. We saw a gigantic market maker move come in. At one point, Bitcoin was at 110,000 US dollars. We can also see here on a 2-week basis in the liquidity heat map that everything was thoroughly worked through to the downside. What all of this means and how it will naturally affect the current week, these are all things we'll discuss in today's video. So make sure to stay tuned until the end. We'll also be talking about Ethereum and the topic of altcoins. We've also received new data and new charts here which definitely give us a clear idea of what my personal expectations are for September. By the way, if you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. Just so you know, I'm actually recording this video for the second time. Simply because we've seen an incredibly strong market maker move here, which of course changes the entire game plan for this week. That's why I'm specifically recording this video from Sunday to Monday night, so you really get the most up-to-date information. Of course, you're welcome to show your support here as well. In any case, I want to sincerely thank you. Otherwise, let's jump right in now. So what exactly happened? Let's briefly recap what happened on Friday, because that is obviously connected to the current market maker move. That's actually quite common. As soon as a pure news-driven move enters the market, the probability is incredibly high that this news move will be reversed immediately, and that's exactly what we saw here. Up to 110,000 US dollars, all the liquidity below us has now been completely cleared out. We can take a look at the whole thing as well. On a weekly basis, everything has been completely and cleanly processed. Of course, we saw a lot of market participants who went long here because of Sharon Paul's speech. That's why there were an incredible number of stop-loss orders here. Within 30 minutes, we saw liquidations totaling 250 billion. You definitely see something like that extremely rarely. In my opinion, this was a complete market maker move. That's why it's especially important now not to let yourself get washed out of the market under any circumstances. That's also why we'll talk about my specific roadmap in just a moment. Now, more than ever, it's really important to keep the bigger picture in mind. That's all I have to say about that for now. That's why things are looking extremely good at the moment, simply because there's no liquidity left below us at all. Everything was thoroughly processed by the market makers, and that's why we now have a lot building up above us, which means the probability is higher that we'll break into the $120,000 range as early as this week. But more on that in a moment. But first, let's briefly talk about Jerome Powell and his speech on Friday. What exactly happened here? I've also summarized this again on my X account. Specifically, the Fed has killed the 2% inflation target. In short, no, but in fact, quite a few things have changed. So, what did Jerome Powell change that led to the markets rallying strongly as a result? Namely, the makeup was removed. 2% remains the target. Deviations are no longer part of the plan, but rather a risk. Specifically, what was announced in this speech is that even though the 2% inflation target has not yet been reached, as we all know, we are currently well above the inflation target, or at least somewhat above it. But what is now possible in day-to-day policy, interest rates can still be cut, for example, to protect the labor market. I've also prepared a graphic for this. Here we see the current unemployment rates, and what we can observe here is the labor market is definitely a risk at this point in time. And what I can actually very well imagine is that pressure has been exerted on Sharon Paul by Donald Trump. We've seen time and again that Donald Trump puts strong pressure on Sharon Paul here. We also saw it during the meeting a few weeks ago. That's why these two factors, labor market data and of course pressure from Donald Trump, have most likely, and as I said, this is just a theory from my side, it's not officially confirmed that Donald Trump exerted pressure behind the scenes here. But I think at the end of the day, everyone can pretty easily deduce this for themselves, and of course this has completely changed the outlook for 2025. Just a week ago, we had a probability of only about 75%, sometimes even less, that an interest rate cut would even take place. This has now been increased again, of course, by Sharon Paul's speech. The entire outlook for 2025 has also changed accordingly. All the probabilities have been repriced, and this has led to us seeing this strong pump. This happened both in the crypto market and of course in the traditional market. Here I have the S&P 500 chart open, and we also saw a strong movement there as well. Now, of course, we have to keep a close eye on how the current week continues to unfold, because as is well known, the correlation between the traditional markets and the crypto market is still extremely high. We can take a look at that here. We can see this quite clearly here, as soon as new all-time highs are reached. When the S&P rises, Bitcoin follows suit, and of course, the same applies in the other direction. Currently, we have a correlation value of 80% here. That's why we definitely need to keep a close eye on the traditional market, but that's the current outlook for now. As long as we see new all-time highs in the traditional market, the crypto market will also rise accordingly. That's the current state of things, but now you definitely know what the current starting situation is. So from a central bank policy perspective, things are looking relatively good, and this brings us closer to the thesis I've mentioned in previous videos that it's quite possible. As I said, feel free to check that out from 6 days ago. I laid out a clear roadmap there, and in today's video we'll also touch a bit on what concerns the coming weeks. Because now we definitely have two opposing scenarios. On one hand, we have extremely strong tailwinds from global liquidity. By now, every one of you should be familiar with this chart. Here, we have a time lag of 75 periods, during which the crypto market aligns and correlates with global liquidity. Therefore, we can actually assume that we can expect new all-time highs over the course of September. On the other hand, things are getting extremely interesting because we also have data, historical data, that shows that September has always been the most negative, the worst month of the entire year, both for Bitcoin and for the traditional market. So this doesn't just affect the crypto market, we can also see in the S&P 500 that over the past few years, September has always been the worst month. And now, of course, we have to ask ourselves very, very strictly, which scenario is actually the most realistic? What is my personal outlook, and above all, what do we need to pay attention to? Exactly this week, and for that, I have definitely prepared some important charts for you. In my opinion, now we're getting to my roadmap, I personally am definitely sticking to my plan. I've said it repeatedly in several YouTube videos, over the past several days, over the past several weeks, you are definitely familiar with the roadmap, and I'm still sticking to my plan. Above all, and this brings us to an important point that I also mentioned 6 days ago, as long as there is no weekly closing price below 112,000 US dollars, I remain bullish and I continue to stick to my plan. That's why, as you know, I still have all my long positions open. The trading bots are working very, very, very efficiently, even during these crash situations that have just occurred. All the sell-offs that have taken place in the last few hours were perfectly exploited to buy cheaply and then immediately sell at a higher price. That's why it's so extremely important to set up all the grids properly. But if you're interested in this topic in more detail, please check out the last YouTube video. As I said, I just wanted to give you a quick update here. I'm honestly incredibly positively surprised. For example, I set up this Solana bot 3 days ago. Now it's already 50% in profit, nearly $300 in profit, because the volatility is being fully taken advantage of here. So I'm definitely really convinced about that, but as I said, there's more about that in the other YouTube video. I've also linked everything in the video description. Otherwise, as I said, this is currently, let's say, the roadmap. I'm definitely sticking to my roadmap, just as I've said in the last YouTube videos. As long as there isn't a weekly closing price below 112,000 US dollars, we still have extremely strong support beneath us. At this point, we've connected the individual all-time highs from the different bull markets, 2017, 2018, 2020, 2022. Here we've connected the tops with each other. Now, also at the current point in time, the entire resistance has now become support, and that's exactly what has happened. The current weekly candle also seems to be closing above it. We also still have our indicator, the Vincent Momentum Band, which remains below us. So we're also getting very strong support from that. The whole thing is working beautifully here again as we have the support bands below us. Just as a quick note, each of you can get these indicators completely free of charge. I've also explained this in the video description, so you know that everything is still intact. And at the moment, it looks exactly as discussed in the previous videos. The current springboard is being pressed between the support below us, basically the general all-time high support that's currently beneath us, and the 2 on the Fibonacci level. That is definitely the current resistance, which is above us at 120,000 US dollars. As soon as a weekly candle closes above this level, above 120,000 US dollars, I'll be extremely bullish again, and then we can definitely assume that the 2.414 will be reached here at 140,000 US dollars. That would actually fit quite well with global liquidity, so we can expect a new all-time high here towards the end of September, also for Bitcoin. And as I said, the whole thing even fits quite well with the schedule regarding the Fed and all the FOMC meetings, because what I could imagine, and I've mentioned this before in another YouTube video, is that there is currently a certain amount of speculation being priced in by market participants. So right now, a relatively positive outcome for 2025 has already been priced in. As we all know, the crypto market only trades the future. It's relatively irrelevant what actually happens in the end. Even if things turn out completely differently, it doesn't really matter, because all the prices are factoring in the future. That's why it's extremely important what kind of speculation is currently present. That's why, in this regard, everything looks relatively good as far as the roadmap itself is concerned. I can easily imagine that we'll pump into the FOMC meeting, meaning that we'll have this sense of euphoria up until then. And when the FOMC meeting actually takes place, there could potentially, though it doesn't have to be the case, there could potentially be some disappointment. And this disappointment is even accompanied by the fact that global liquidity is decreasing over the course of October. That's why I'm also questioning the timing and the data here. I know you should never bet against timing and data, but still in this cycle, we've already had quite a few surprises at this point. If I take a look at the monthly view of Bitcoin at this point, we usually had very green numbers in February and March. So here the average, basically the mean value was plus 13, plus 12%, but in this cycle it was the opposite. In this cycle, we saw a negative February and a negative March. And I can imagine it being the same this September, because if I look at the general sentiment right now, many other YouTubers' opinions on Twitter or various blog posts, I already see things like biggest crash of all time and so on. So if you really take a look at the overall sentiment here, there is a certain level of fear. We also actually see a fear and greed index that is currently just neutral. That's why there is a certain fear in the air. Many people assume that September will be very much in the red. But what I can imagine is that we might actually see a surprise, that the opposite happens, and we have a positive September due to global liquidity, but then a red October. People always talk about October in the crypto market, which is basically a kind of synonym for October, meaning it's always green in October, but maybe this time it's the opposite, and we might even see a correction in October, and then possibly we can expect new all-time highs heading into November, December, and January, when the real altcoin season takes place. So that's actually my personal primary scenario. Of course, I'm also open to other scenarios. Theoretically, it could also happen that Bitcoin crashes again to around $100,000, which is rather unrealistic. And then, of course, there's also the risk that things turn out the way, let's say, historical data suggest. But to be honest, at the moment, my primary scenario is not that September will be red. I can actually imagine that September will be green, but maybe October will be a bit weaker. In any case, we have to keep a very close eye on everything. We have to closely monitor what are the traditional markets doing. What is Bitcoin doing? What are the current probabilities? So, of course, we also have to wait and see what happens on the 17th of September. That's all I have to say on that for now. Still, personally, I'm staying long. I am still positioned accordingly. I still expect that we can look forward to higher prices in the next few days, in the next few weeks. That's exactly why I set up all my positions accordingly. So you'll definitely be kept up to date on that, or otherwise in my Telegram group, I keep you constantly updated as well. Even if, let's say, a trade goes in the other direction, we've just discussed that this past weekend. So to sum it up briefly, it's extremely important that you never let yourself get washed out of the market by such movements. It was purely a market maker move. As I said, we can also see all of this here using the liquidity heat map. And right now, everything looks better than ever because everything below has been nicely cleared out and now there's a lot building up above us. Of course, we now have a lot of frustrated investors who, out of frustration, have opened short positions here, both on a 2-week basis and even on a monthly basis. Yes, even on a monthly basis, we've now cleared everything below us cleanly. This move by the market makers, almost textbook perfect, has taken place, and now we're seeing more and more building up above us again, both on a weekly and a 3-day basis. So I think this week is likely to be positive. Of course, we also have to wait for all the US openings in the traditional markets, but that's the current state of things here for now. That's all for now on the topic of Bitcoin and the general roadmap. Just to touch on it briefly again, no, the bull run is not over yet. At this point, we haven't seen a single indicator suggesting that we're currently overheating, that the bull run is over or anything like that. So please don't let that throw you off. Especially now when the market makers are playing their games here, particularly after such news-driven moves. Yes, you can definitely keep in mind that such news-driven moves are almost always worked off. So it's actually very rare that a news-driven move ends in a way that you can build on a solid foundation. That's really very rare. It's almost the rule that these news-driven moves, especially in such a short time, are always reversed. That's all there is to say about that for now. Now let's move on to the topic of Ethereum. I definitely wanted to briefly mention that as well. We now have some current on-chain data here that I want to quickly go over. At the moment, the exchange supply is still decreasing, which of course also benefits Ethereum. The price is rising and accordingly, the exchange reserves, that is how much Ethereum is actually available, are steadily decreasing. It's nice to see things like this, and what I also really like about Ethereum at the moment, if you take a look behind the scenes, is the current trading volume from the treasury companies, meaning the big players, basically the capital from the large institutions. They are currently more interested in trading Ethereum, and for the first time, it has overtaken Bitcoin. So we are definitely seeing a clear trend reversal here, which is of course also reflected in the price of Ethereum. This is also evident in the dependency of Ethereum on Bitcoin, where the trend has now been very sustainably broken. And right now we are seeing a clear outperformance of Ethereum compared to Bitcoin. In my opinion, this trend will continue to develop further. We actually managed to break through to a new all-time high with Ethereum. That was actually to be expected. I've said it over and over again on YouTube. I've also posted it repeatedly on Twitter, so we already had quite a few indications beforehand. We've seen time and again that the Ethereum inflow is extremely strong. Back then, on July 24th, I had already posted that the current setup here is better than ever. So as I said, you can look all of this up either on my X account or in the YouTube videos, but if you follow me, you're basically always up to date. That's why I'm still positive about Ethereum. But now we have to be careful. So once again, just briefly on the topic of risk. This resistance that currently exists is not going to be broken just like that. And there's one thing I want to make very clear because we're already seeing quite a few bullish forecasts on Twitter and elsewhere. So Ethereum is not just going to do something like that overnight. So it's not going to happen that quickly either, because at the end of the day, everything clearly depends on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin first has to reclaim the 120,000 US dollars so that there's room for Ethereum as well. Because the idea that Ethereum will hit one all-time high after another and enter the price discovery phase while Bitcoin is stagnating, that's pretty unrealistic. So we still definitely need Bitcoin as a catalyst. And just as an important note, Bitcoin has to overheat first. Bitcoin first needs to reach the area of plus or minus 140,000 US dollars, which, as I said, is also my price target. Yes, so my short-term price target for the coming weeks is the 2.414 Fibonacci level, and when we enter that range, Ethereum will also continue to gain accordingly. This way, Ethereum can move into the price discovery phase, and then, as a result, altcoins will finally reach new all-time highs as well. We can currently see this quite well by looking at the crypto total market cap excluding BTC and ETH chart. This is also called Total 3, so to speak. Anyone can also try to recreate this at home. And what we can see here is that we are now just about to reach a new all-time high also for the altcoins. Since 2021, we've had this peak here. We approached it again in December 2024, and now once more. And now things are getting extremely exciting. So right now, we're really in a clear decision phase, whether we'll move into the price discovery phase here as well. Logically, this would go hand in hand with Ethereum, and then we can also expect a solid rally here with altcoins. I'm deliberately using the word rally and not altcoin season. In my opinion, I can really imagine that. Now we're going to talk a bit about the altcoin season roadmap. I can actually imagine that it might not quite be enough for a real altcoin season yet, even if Bitcoin reaches price ranges of 130 to 140,000 US dollars. In my view, Bitcoin actually needs to go a bit higher still. A truly euphoric phase can certainly happen. So, in my opinion, a real altcoin season only takes place when Bitcoin is trading above 140,000 US dollars. That's when things really start to get exciting, because then we slowly but surely move step by step into the overheated zone with Bitcoin, and that will also lead to the altcoins really taking off. But still, yes, we have to keep in mind that if Ethereum also heads towards price ranges of 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 US dollars, then the altcoins will also do extremely well, and we will see a solid performance here as well. That is definitely my clear position at the moment. I think with today's video, you've received a very concrete roadmap. You now definitely know what matters. You have all the charts in view. Of course, we will follow everything live here on this YouTube channel. Naturally, I will keep you updated. And as I said, if you appreciate the work, me preparing this video for you in the middle of the night from Sunday to Monday, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. I would also be really happy to receive positive comments from you. Otherwise, if you're completely new to the crypto market, I recommend Bitpanda. I've linked it in the video description. That's where I buy and sell my cryptocurrencies. Otherwise, all the trading bots run on Pionex. With this video, you're definitely up to date as well. Otherwise, if you're interested in trading, I've linked my video course up here on the top left. It's definitely worth checking out. I put a lot of effort into it, and of course feel free to watch my other videos as well. This trading strategy here has also been really well received by you all, so you're definitely covered there. And with a subscription, you'll always stay up to date anyway. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you again in the next YouTube video.